Iran is signaling cautious engagement following reports that a draft agreement with the United States is taking shape. The deal could be signed as soon as this weekend, with a ceremony most likely held in Geneva. Iranian state media pushing back on suggestions that Tehran would concede control over the Strait of Hormuz, brushing off any commitment to transfer management of this crucial waterway. The draft also includes provisions to release around $24 billion in frozen Iranian assets. It reportedly sets out a 60-day window in which to reach a broader deal on Iran's nuclear program. But Tehran says it will not give up its right to enrich uranium. Despite apparent progress on the terms, Iranian officials have stressed no final deal with Washington has been reached. The U.S. President Donald Trump, however, saying a deal is close to being finalized. Egypt, meanwhile, urging both sides to seize what it's calling an available opportunity for a deal after Donald Trump cancelled planned strikes on Iran. The draft also raising hopes of a broader framework for de-escalation, including in Lebanon. Meanwhile, India has summoned a senior American diplomat for a second time in 2 days after U.S. strikes killed 2 of its sailors in waters off the Gulf of Oman. Delhi has issued a strong protest demanding that U.S. forces cease hostilities. Washington insists those strikes are part of its blockade against Iranian shipping activity. And for more, we're joined by Blake Sifton for CNA. He joins us from Tel Aviv. Blake, that draft proposal calling for a ceasefire on all fronts, including in Lebanon. Now, we've spent many times on this program discussing how the difficulty of reaching an agreement on this particular front. How realistic is it, again, at this point?
Good evening, Wei Su. That's right. According to Iranian state media, a Hezbollah lawmaker, as well as media linked to Hezbollah, this agreement between Iran and the United States would include a cessation of hostilities in Lebanon and potentially a full Israeli military pullout from southern Lebanon. There are also reports that Israel would immediately need to cease demolitions in southern Lebanon. They have been bulldozing and essentially flattening entire villages in the south, which they say is Hezbollah infrastructure. Now, none of this is confirmed, but if it did become part of a deal, Israel would surely be very unhappy with it, and President Trump would need to lean hard on Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu to ensure that he meets those commitments, because Israel badly wants Hezbollah disarmed. They have invaded southern Lebanon, pushed deep into the south, and essentially occupied southern Lebanon because they say they want to create a buffer zone to protect Israeli border communities from Hezbollah anti-tank missiles, as well as fiber optic drones. And pulling out at this stage, from their perspective, would undermine those goals. Now, Israel has also tried very hard to separate the war in Lebanon from a potential wider deal between Iran and the U.S., but Iran has insisted that they are linked, and they have insisted that a ceasefire in Lebanon is a prerequisite for a wider deal with Iran. With the U.S., Meanwhile, Israeli airstrikes are continuing in southern Lebanon. And of course, we saw earlier this week just how quickly the fighting in Lebanon can spread to include Iran, can spiral out of control and potentially jeopardize a deal.
Blake, so this MOU between the U.S. and Iran would, and I quote Iran here, include a permanent and immediate cessation of hostilities on all fronts, including in Lebanon. As you just outlined, Israel has consistently and very explicitly opposed any such agreement. Do you see any signs, as you suggest, of Israeli unhappiness on this emerging framework?
Absolutely. There are reports that President Trump did not warn Prime Minister Netanyahu that he was calling off those most recently planned strikes on Iran, or that he was going to announce that a deal was imminent. And the Israeli Prime Minister was said to have been caught off guard. Now, last night, Prime Minister Netanyahu put out a statement saying that he spoke to President Trump. And even though Israel is not a party to these negotiations, he said that President Trump has committed that Israel's core interests will be covered in this final deal that is meant to eventually come out of this initial agreement. He said that Iran's stockpile of enriched uranium would be removed and that their ability to enrich uranium in the future would be stopped. But he also said that limits would be placed on their missile program. Israel wants limits placed on the range of Iranian missiles so that they can no longer reach Israeli territory. He also said that Iran would need to stop their support for regional proxy forces. By that, of course, he means Hezbollah in Lebanon, the Houthi movement in Yemen, as well as Hamas and Islamic Jihad in Gaza and the West Bank. But Iranian state media, well, they say that the nuclear question will be negotiated in talks that follow this initial deal. They say that there will be no talks on Iran's missile program or on their support for regional forces. So we won't know until this deal is signed. We won't know which side was telling the truth until it's agreed and these details come out. But one side will surely be disappointed in the outcome.
Thanks. Blake Sifton there reporting live for CNA from Tel Aviv.